The paper makes a sound when it is unfolded. Not loud, more like cloth being pulled apart after it has been pressed flat for too long. October 12, 1944. The barracks at Camp Shelby, Mississippi are still cool in the morning, the pine boards damp with night air. A Gefreiter from the 352nd Infantry Division runs his thumb along the edge of the sheet, feeling the thinness. It is not the thick stationery he remembers from home. It smells faintly of wood pulp and disinfectant. Above him, nailed to a beam, a typed notice from the U.S. Army Provost Marshal's office explains the rules again. Prisoners of war may write 2 letters and 4 postcards per month. Inspections will be conducted in accordance with the Geneva Convention of 1929. No reprisals, no penalties for content except military information. The Gefreiter reads it for the 3rd time. He does not trust it.
He was captured outside St. Lo in July, after the sky itself seemed to come apart. For weeks before, the aircraft had never stopped, fighters low enough to see faces, bombers so high they were only a sound, a distant tearing. What his officers had promised, that American air power was clumsy, wasteful, exaggerated by propaganda, had dissolved in hedgerows and smoke. Units vanished without ever seeing the enemy on the ground. Orders stopped arriving. Rations burned where they were dropped. Men learned to fear daylight. When he surrendered, he expected the rest to follow. Interrogation, beatings, a lesson. That was how the system worked. Authority announced itself through pain. Instead, there was a cigarette, a canteen, silence. Now, months later, the silence is still here, heavier than noise. In the barrack, an Unteroffizier sharpens a pencil with a razor blade issued by the camp. He shaves wood carefully, saving the graphite. A lieutenant sits on his bunk, staring at his own blank page, as if it might accuse him. The men have been told the mail will be collected on Fridays. They have also been told it will be read. They have not been told what happens afterward. The lieutenant was educated enough to know the Geneva Convention existed. He had even cited it once, during training, as an example of enemy hypocrisy. Article 36, prisoners allowed to correspond with their families. Article 42, inspections by a protecting power. On paper, it sounded generous. In practice, he had been assured it was a fiction. Democracies wrote rules they did not follow. Yet here is the paper. U.S. Army watermark in the corner, no Nazi eagle, no oath. He writes his name first, carefully. Rank, Feldpost number, from memory, though he does not know if it still exists. He hesitates before the greeting. Meine liebe Anna, he begins, then stops. Ink pools slightly at the end of the line. He imagines the letter intercepted in Bremen, a clerk noting every word. He imagines the knock on his wife's door. He imagines his son learning a new silence. Across the room, the Gefreiter has started differently. He does not write about the war. He asks about the apple trees behind the house, whether the harvest was early this year. He remembers the phrase his mother used for the smell of crushed fruit. He cannot quite spell it anymore. His hand shakes. The letters tilt. The shock is not that the Americans allow this. The shock is that they seem indifferent to it. There are guards outside. Some are barely older than the conscripts who once watched him from French ditches. They carry rifles, yes, but they do not hover. The letters are dropped into a canvas sack, not a furnace. Weeks pass. No one is called out at night. No one is punished for tone. At Fort Lawton, Washington, where another group of prisoners is held, a former Luftwaffe mechanic, once responsible for keeping Messerschmitts flying, writes to his brother in Hamburg. He describes the rain, the food. He avoids mention of aircraft, but not out of fear of American censors, out of habit. For years, air power had been spoken of in absolutes, German planes as destiny, enemy planes as exaggeration. There is no coded threat, No warning to stop writing. The Gefreiter receives his mother's reply in November. The paper smells faintly of smoke. She tells him the apples were few this year, that the neighbor's roof is gone, that she hopes he is warm. She does not ask about politics. She does not tell him to be brave. She ends with a line that has been crossed out and rewritten, the ink darker. He traces it with his finger.
He waits for the consequence. It does not come. In the camp, conversations change, not in volume, but in direction. Men begin to speak less about what will happen after the war and more about what has already happened, about orders that made no sense, about radio broadcasts that contradicted their own eyes, about aircraft that appeared even when told they would not. American air power had not just dominated the skies, it had erased the certainty beneath them. Capture was supposed to be the end of agency. Instead, this small permission to write, to ask, to hear back creates a fracture. If this enemy allows words to pass unpunished, then what else has been misrepresented? The question is never spoken aloud as a challenge. It arrives in pauses, in men stopping mid-sentence, in the way a lieutenant folds a letter twice, then unfolds it again, as if checking it has not changed. Inspections occur. Swiss representatives walk through, neutral, noting conditions. The provost marshal's reports are filed. The system functions. That, too, is unsettling. Indoctrination had taught that systems without fear collapse. Here, the fence holds without shouting. By early 1945, the Gefreiter writes again. He mentions that he works in the camp laundry, that he has learned the English word for steam. He avoids describing kindness. He avoids describing doubt. He asks instead about the church bell, whether it still rings. The war ends somewhere else first. The sky does not change here. There is no announcement in the barrack, only a rumor, then confirmation. Men sit on their bunks with letters in their hands that now belong to a different world. Years later, what remains is not gratitude, it is not forgiveness, it is the memory of an expectation unmet, the expectation of cruelty, prepared for and endured in advance, that never arrived, the sound of paper unfolding in a quiet room, and the slow, destabilizing realization that an enemy who dominates the skies does not always need to dominate the mind, and that discovering this too late leaves a silence that no doctrine can easily fill.